Hey, curious friends, we have an exciting announcement. We, Sarah and Jane, are doing a course together coming up.
It's called Empowered Mediumship. It's for the beginning mediums or anyone interested in how mediumship works. And we will be teaching you how to tune into your intuition. We'll teach you tools to feel safe while you're perceiving energy that isn't yours, and how to connect to divine energy and loved ones across the veil. So how do you find more about this, Jane?
Just head on over to mediumcurious.com and you can sign up right there. And we can't wait to meet you. Hey, everybody. I'm Jane.
And I'm Sarah.
And you're listening to the Medium Curious podcast, the show that takes the woo-woo and makes it woot-woot. I'm sure about that one.
Sounds good to me. Today we have on Liz Entin. She is a sciency skeptic and the author of the WTF Just Happened books and the WTF Just Happened podcast.
She's amazing and she's such a magical skeptic.
She's very sciencey.
She's going to download all the science.
She's a wealth of knowledge. We love her.
Totally. All right, goody. Let's get to it. Here's Liz. Well, first of all, Liz, so excited. Thank you for joining us on our podcast. We're both huge fans of your podcast and your books. And, you're our first podcast host to come over to ours.
Oh my God, thank you. I'm a huge fan of your podcast. So this seems like a great conversation. A great deal. Yeah.
We should be hanging out. Well, I'm wondering if you can start off. I'm actually mimicking the cool thing you do where, can you just tell a little bit about your journey and who you are and how you sit where you sit today?
Sure. So I'm Liz Entin. I am host of the podcast WTF Just Happened, all about the afterlife, no woo. And I'm author of the WTF series. I have 2 books in it now. And I consider myself a skeptical atheist who examined evidence of an afterlife and concluded it's really, really substantial. And what I always say is now there's a preponderance of evidence, and I'm pretty convinced. So
I'm so grateful for your books. I really I've been reading your first book this past week, and you have it all in there. I'm so happy to have that as a reference. But your own personal story that you put in there too is just so compelling, and it's got me full of so many questions about you.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, do you want to tell us a little bit about what was it that made you want to pursue a study of the afterlife? Because you've really actually just pursued it. You've investigated it like nothing else.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, in 2015, my dad passed away. And as I said, I'm like skeptical atheist and not even like the backlash against a religious culture the way a lot of atheists I've come to realize I was raised in a very secular culture. Anything like an afterlife or mediumship was just a non-issue. Might as well have just pretty much been non-existent. I was raised culturally Jewish, but if anyone knows that the secular Judaism, like there's no such thing as a God or afterlife. It's just you don't even talk about it. So when we had that first horrible talk with the doctors that they were moving him to hospice, I pretty much just kind of felt like, what do I even do with that? What do I even do? And it's kind of where it all began, because my very first thought kind of in that griefy fog was, is it possible to turn back time? And just kind of one of those, not literally sitting there trying to draw a time machine, but just, I had a flash of thought. Is that the case? Because if it is, and people figured it out, it's very likely we wouldn't even know what was going on. And
wow.
Yeah. I mean, we might even be traveling within time ourselves and not aware of it. So I Googled that, and I guess it also came about thinking that time travel is also science fiction, and so much of science fiction comes true. So I Googled that and I found out that time travel is actually completely possible. Theoretically, it's not practical, but according to Einstein's time relativity, if, for example, if you were to take two twins and build a spaceship that travels, let's say, close to the speed of light, and I'm going to have the exact numbers wrong, but the concept right. Let's say you put one twin on the spaceship and the other stays on Earth. Let's say the one travels for 5 years and, ages 5 years, gains 5 years of knowledge. The one on Earth, 20 years will have passed. And yeah, I see your face, Jane. That was my face. I was just like, what the fuck? And if that is hence the title of my whole brand. And my thought was, if something absolutely unchangeable, factual as time was really different than how we perceive it, what else?
Right. What else?
What don't we know?
What else? What else? Yeah. Could we think? And, my next thought was, and this is what I thought at the time, I've since pretty much changed my mind on most of this, but my next thought was, if consciousness is created by brain neurons, and you take the concept of eternity, our planet's not going to exist eternally, but I assume that there's eternal big bangs, big crunches. I don't even know how many Goldilocks planets in the universe. I mean, solar systems. And if anyone doesn't know, Goldilocks planets are like Earth that are sustainable to complex life. So if you take the concept of eternity, eternal big bangs, big crunches, and just the accidental evolution of humans coming around, there's no way that other species, even if it will take 1 trillion years, which is a blip in the concept of eternity, there's no way another set of complex humans or other creatures similar that get to enjoy full lives won't evolve. And the whole concept of reincarnation, where someone lives, although I never would use that word, where someone lives multiple lives as different beings, it's going to happen again. Another set of brain neurons will create not necessarily another me as a Liz, but at least some other being, whether human or something else, that I get to live. And when you've thought your whole life that the alternative is complete obliteration, that's a pretty good deal.
We're back.
Yeah, suddenly it opens all kinds of possibilities.
Yes.
And especially for the connection of love, the continuation of love, and the continuation of that dear relationship that you miss so much when you lose somebody.
Just to tag onto that, your book, I just fell in love with your dad. I mean, I fell in love with you. I think you're a beautiful writer. I think your voice is so funny and so clear. And I'm just going to gush for one more hot second. The dialogue is hilarious. I started just highlighting. It's like, this medium is like, aren't you done being a skeptic? And you're like, no. And that's the end of it. That's all. There's all those great bits that you do. But one about your sweet dad, I just loved going. I mean, grief is so brutal, right? It's fucking terrible. And a lot of our listeners have either been there, and that might be what brought them to this topic, like it seemed to have done for you. I'm wondering if you can just tell us a little bit about kind of the early days and sort of some of your first ahas and your first revelations, as you started to go wait a minute.
So I guess those very early days, I was saying I had that first thought that we could live multiple lives. And I was, at this point, if we're talking about emotions, my dad was living, but, no longer present. Not conscious, not there. He didn't even look like him, which, if any of your listeners, unfortunately, I'm sure can relate. I won't go further with that, but it's just, I felt like I couldn't even go on. And I had that initial thought about multiple lives with brain neurons. So I Googled that, and that was the biggest game changer, because I found Doctors Ian Stevenson and Jim Tucker. Are your listeners familiar with them? Do you want me to explain who they are?
We've actually talked about reincarnation here before because that was my first book. That was the book that first introduced me to all of this too. That's when our last
Jim Tucker.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had a son who was remembering his past life and was talking about it incessantly. Meanwhile, my best friend had just lost her son. So my babysitter brings in Jim Tucker's book and she says, you need to read this. This is really important right now. And the synchronicity of that at that moment to be handed that book, it just blew my mind. So yeah, please continue.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So, then I'll just briefly say Doctors Ian Stevenson, who passed away, and I found Dr. Jim Tucker, who was his protege, child psychiatrist, professors at University of Virginia, studying cases of kids with past lives in a very logical, non-spiritual way. Just these seem to be the facts. And I started to see that they were, Dr. Tucker was written about on NPR and interviewed there. And they were part of the University of Virginia and professors there of psychiatry. And once you find one of them, there's a whole department at the University of Virginia called the Division of Perceptual Studies, where afterlife and psychic abilities and all of this is studied in a very grounded, kind of logical, non-woo, non-spiritual, for lack of a better word, not to knock spirituality, but nevertheless not spiritual way. And I was just like, oh my fucking God. Like, if this is true, this is the biggest game changer of the whole world. And I just sat in my grief-stricken ball, just reading everything Dr. Ian Stevenson and Jim Tucker. And then, through University of Virginia, you find Dr. Bruce Grayson, who writes about near-death experiences, and, doctors Ed and Emily Kelly, and they do research on mediums and psi abilities. And then from finding all this, you find other valid researchers, such as the Windbridge Institute with Dr. Julie Beischel and Mark Bacuzzi, who do up to quintuple blinded studies on psychic mediums. I mean, there is this vast body of very logical research. I mean, even going back over 100 years, when you start looking into a place called the Society for Cyclical Research that started in London, and now, they have branches all over. So I just was reading and reading and reading, and I was just like, I couldn't quite process it. I was like, they're saying this is true. If this is true, this is the world's biggest game changer. But if this is true, how are people like Dr. Stephen Hawking was living at the time? I was like, how are people like Dr. Stephen Hawking? How is the New York Times? How, is Neil deGrasse Tyson? How are they not stopping everything to jump in on this? Because this is the biggest thing ever. So, I just was like, there's got to be a catch. And that's pretty much what my early days were like. And this weird combination of the emotions of just devastating grief combined with the most fascinated and hopeful I've ever felt. Because I mean, I would even rather if someone was like, you can have your dad back for 20 years, but there's no afterlife. I would pick losing my dad. Like, this is the idea of an afterlife is literally the best thing I could have ever thought. And I never, ever, not a iota of me ever thought that was a real possibility. So it was the weirdest combination of the worst I've ever felt with this joy, I guess a little bit of joy and hope. And I just was terrified to get my hopes up because I couldn't believe this was real. So that was kind of those early days.
So beautiful. I know when I was looking at your book, you mentioned how some of this research has been overlooked or poo-pooed by the rest of the science world. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like how the criticism of Jim Tucker you say that it's very shallow, like the criticism.
Yeah, I'll do my best to talk about it. Myself and many others are still so baffled. I can't really figure out why. There's a lot of theories, scientists will lose their funding. A lot just haven't bothered to delve in because they assume it's going to be nonsense. I mean, there is a lot of, with all due respect, nonsense surrounding this. So I think until you start really delving in, that's what's assumed. But And there are some scientists taking it really seriously. It's just as soon as they do, then they're called nonsense too. There are two scientists I greatly admire, Sir Roger Penrose and Dr. Stuart Hameroff, and they're studying ways the brain could work where consciousness is not created by a brain, but downloaded by it. They've won Nobel Prizes. They've worked with Dr. Stephen Hawking. So there are scientists. It's just then they're sort of called woo or called not serious. So
stigmatized.
You've had many guests that I've really loved. And obviously we're excited for our listeners who haven't already found you to find you, because it's so rich and you've been podcasting for a long time. So there's tons of amazing interviews. And I should have jotted it down, but you had a physicist on not too long ago who was talking about how she has to keep it on the DL. Like she's super fascinated. And I mean, obviously she was on your pod, but she's just like, yeah. And that people will come up to her and be like, oh my God, I'm so with you. I totally believe it, but I would never say it in the office. Or like, so it's just it seemed like the real cultural problem of like people, they 100% believe it, but they're not going to say it.
Yeah, there is apparently a lot of that I've heard from, there's a neuroscientist who said that I had on. There is physicist Rosa Hope. I have another physicist coming out in a few weeks. Probably by the time this is live, it'll be out. Dr. Tiffany Todd. I mean, there are a lot. There is even, and I write about this in my first book, and unfortunately I don't have the actual name of the scientist, but there was a ghost hunter I know how absurd that might sound to people listening early and learning about this, but, he went to an event and there was a very, very prominent scientist there. And the scientist said to him, I mean, it's one everyone would know and admire if they're science-minded. And the scientist said to him, everything I know about science, this makes sense. This could be possible. And I can never tell anyone I'm here because I will lose my funding and I will no longer be taken seriously. So again, this is secondhand told to me, but this person would have no reason to lie to me. So and I have heard that as time's gone on from other people where people have pulled them aside privately and been like, yeah, there could be something, I just can't talk about it. So
what's the gag order? What is it?
Because I think there has been a lot of fakery and there has been a lot of fraud, and there are, I mean, it's not a totally solid, I mean, people have taken advantage of people in grief. People are taken advantage of all the time. So I think your approach is really great. I think you're offering to your listeners and now our listeners is so important. And because you are science-minded and you are a skeptic. So can you talk a little bit about those first mediumship experiences that you had?
Oh my God. Oh my God, which ones? Now the good reading I had, the frauds, or like how awkward I was when I went to mediumship workshops.
With your gloves.
My gloves, oh my God.
Yeah, tell us about the gloves. Just start there.
The rubber gloves. Okay, I can tell you guys about that. I'm still teased about that. So I would hide my identity completely when I got medium readings, a fake name. Sometimes I'd give Liz. In fact, I did a lot, but I mean, how many Liz's are there? Sometimes I'd give a completely fake name. I tried to mix it up in case there was they were keeping a database of information, a database. So I would do different fake names and sometimes Liz with different names. I mean, I had all these techniques. I used a VPN when I booked on websites in case there was some tracking type of technology. I had other people pay that weren't family members, every Google Voice numbers, everything. Oh, and two mediums I went to. One, I've gotten to know well, named Janet Mayer, and she is so honest, so evidential, so good, has been researched by scientists, and she required a paper check. So I went and I think I got someone else's no, actually I think I got a money order because what friends have a paper check? It was the only person I know with paper checks is my mom. So I went and got a money order. And then the other medium, he wanted you to fill out a paper form and include a paper check, also money order. And then, so I wore rubber gloves in case they had fingerprint technology. So I was like, maybe they have friends in the CIA or FBI. And that's.
So you were were just afraid that they were going to look you up, figure you out, and give you evidence that they had discovered by looking you up.
Facebook or Instagram or whatever.
Or Google.
Or
all of
even beyond that.
Or the deep web.
Exactly. Or FBI connections. I'm like, maybe like the ones that are considered the most evidential, it's because they secretly have an uncle in the FBI who's helping them. And, I didn't know, maybe.
So tell us about that first good reading that you had that did make you think, oh, this could be real.
Oh my God. I will say lucky. My medium friends will say this was not luck. My very first medium reading, I would give her name, but she doesn't do readings anymore. And she was very low key. She wasn't part of scientific research. She wasn't part of Windbridge or Forever Family. I didn't know about Forever Family Foundation at that time. It was really Windbridge. And she was just like this little hole in the wall medium that shockingly a colleague, the wife of a colleague of my mom, her colleague had passed away and we were at an event and she was like, oh, I went to this medium. My poor mom's like, oh, here we go again. My daughter's been locked in her room reading scientific studies of mediums. And like my mom still at this point thought it was complete nonsense. So this woman said she went to a medium and I asked her if I could get the name. I went. Oh my God, this woman knew fact after fact after fact. And she, for example, like with my dad, I'd always say, okay, I love you, Dad. And he'd be like, okay. And I'd be like, excuse me, don't you want to say you love me? Like, that's so rude. And he'd be like, you know what I think of you. And at the end of the reading, she tried to ask my dad if he had like a final message, like he loved me. And she said basically he was like, nah, she knows what I think of her. And also, even to this day, if a medium says they love you, like I'm so evidence-based, I'm like, I don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear like anything that's not like scoreable. So that was so perfect too. And so that was absolutely transforming. But of course, I wondered, I'd screwed up with that one and gave my real phone number. So I was like, oh God, just, I'm like state of Brave. I never made that mistake again. But
evidence that she wouldn't have known, like that little bit of evidence at the end, like he's not going to say, he's like, okay, you know how I feel about you. Like, that's not something she could Google. That's his personality.
And it turned out a friend of mine, another medium, knew her really well, said, he was like, I could not think of a better medium for you. He's like, she is like, I don't even want to bring emotions into this. She's like, a reading should be nothing but fact evidence. I don't want to bring any of the fluff. And he was like, how perfect for you for your first reading. So.
Yeah. And you also felt energy too, right?
It was so weird. Yes. I felt like all this stuff sort of moving around me. And I did this really weird thing and I can't explain why. I just like put my hands like almost like maybe you would in like a cliche seance, like 2 inches above the table. And I just left them there. I mean, that's not comfortable. I mean, I know no one can see that now. I'm trying to do it now. I'm like, I would never want to sit like that. But I did it and kept them there the whole time. And I have no idea why. And
that's it was fascinating.
It's so weird.
And you were sensing stuff energetically that was brand new to you. You had never, ever felt anything like that before, right?
Wait, are we still talking about that first reading?
Yeah.
Because I know there's a lot of fun stories about energy swirling around you, but you're talking about the first reading, yeah? Okay.
Yeah, I felt like things kind of moving around my sides and around me. And I mean, part of me was in the moment like, wow, I'm feeling this. And I was just kind of there evaluating and I wasn't fully processing that. And part of me was a little like, this could also be brain neurons healing. I've never had brain neurons have to heal a loss like this before. And it could make your body have weird sensations. And it was just all lots of weird.
Yeah.
Definitely. Now I would say it's some form of probably energy or not brain neurons healing, I'll say. I don't know what exactly it is, but somehow tied into all this that.
Can you talk to us about the Forever Family Foundation and your journey with that organization? It feels like it's
special. Yeah, I can. It's very special. It was founded by Fran and Bob Ginsberg, and sadly, Fran passed away in 2020, which just shattered me because she became like my mom. And Fran and Bob Ginsburg lost their daughter Bailey, who would be about my age now, in 2000. Oh God, I should know if it's 2001 or 2002. I believe in 2001, and the foundation was started in 2002. And she passed in a car accident at 15 years old. And Bob was very much like me, like 100% skeptical, thought this was complete nonsense. Fran was open to it, but like it just wasn't part of their lives. So after losing their daughter, they did all the research, found scientists, and put an organization together that uses science-based testing to certify psychic mediums and has a board of scientific advisors, such as Dr. Jim Tucker.
Okay. And you began volunteering for them, right? And that's sort of how you began to have lots of medium friends?
Yes, I started volunteering for them. At the time, really, I was just like, there's got to be a catch. I have to get behind the scenes and see what's going on. There's no way this is real. And I figured from like reading about Fran and Bob's approach, they were very similar to me. So I was like, well, if they're still doing this, they must have assessed this is real. I was like, but there's still got to be a catch. Maybe they've missed it. It was like all these thoughts, like of different,
you're not looking in the right place.
Swirling. Yeah. Like somehow, or
missing
like
something. Yeah.
Missing something, because if obviously like a lot of people lie to themselves if they really want something to be true, So, I mean, it never once did I think they were dishonest, but before really getting to know them, I thought, or before I even really met them, I thought maybe they're missing something. I mean, a lot of people could do that.
Yeah. You want to delude yourself when you're in so much pain. Yeah. Like that absolutely makes sense. And we have, there's a lot of connections with our guests and with Sarah, with Laura Lynn Jackson, who is one of the more famous mediums, really, along with Tyler Henry. And I wonder if you can tell the Laura Lynn Jackson story of kind of like how you had booked that reading and, it took a while, and maybe you can just tell us a little bit about your experience with her.
Oh my God. Well, yes. If anyone reads this, not only do people know from what they read about her how evidential she is, and you'll also see how patient that woman is, because I gave her a very hard time for a very long time. I'm actually still on her wait list for a reading, and now we've become friends. So it's like, I mean, I've gotten mini readings like out, but yeah. So Laura, I guess there's multiple things to say about her, including more stuff I put into my second book, which I'll actually tell a funny story that didn't make it in my first book, because my editor was like, Liz, this is so extreme. No one would think this. Just take it out of your book. And then
oh my God.
I thought maybe her and Dr. Julie Beischel were the same person. So... Which, like, Dr. Julie Beischel found out and made fun of me about, like, the same way, like, Janet Mayer found out about the rubber gloves and, like, all this stuff that made sense to me in the beginning. Now they're all, like... So, like, psychic.com and all those ridiculous, like...
Oh, yeah.
Kind of, like... I guess there was one in the 90s where you'd pay, like, $5 a minute to talk to a fake psychic. So I was like, well, there's probably, like, the founder of psychic.com made up a scientific researcher and then made up just like characters of mediums that were certified by a scientist. And then, they probably hired ghostwriters. At that point, I thought books probably made a ton of money. Heads up, they don't. But, so yes. So I thought, and then I thought, like, you'd log on, get a reading, and it would be like upgrade for a reading with a Windbridge medium, like $10 a minute instead of like $5, and buy Dr. Julie Beischel's books. And I was like, so I like just taking like Dr. Julie Beischel's photo, Laura Lynn Jackson's photo, putting them through like Google image search, trying to see if they were like stock images of characters. So.
I mean, yeah, you really put them through the test. That's hilarious.
So,
I think it makes perfect sense, because there's so much that our entire society is so skeptical. So I think you're actually more the zeitgeist. Yeah. So anyway, so please go on.
Yeah. And then I had like Dr. Beischel on my podcast. She's just like, may I ask you a question? I'm like, sure. And I like look up to this woman so much. I like can't believe I have her on my podcast. I can't believe I've met her. She's like, Is it true you thought I was like a bot fake? I was like, oh God, that was not the question I wanted. But yes, and I did. And I thought you and Laura and like our other Windbridge mediums were the same person. But so at the time, I then also attended Laura Lynn's workshops. And this is where you can get an insight into this woman's great level of patience. I mean, I sat in the back and like every 5 minutes was raising my hand. And I was like, Dr. Stephen Hawking says there isn't an afterlife. So can you tell me why you think there is? And and then I was like, yes, but what quantum particle is this non-physical consciousness made of? Oh, God, I mean, this like really sweet woman tried to be my friend at one of the workshops. And I was like, yeah, I think you're a plant. I can't really talk to you. So, I mean, it's so sad. She was so sweet. We could probably have been friends to this day, like early grave, like if I had been a little more open. I would like eat lunch by myself. I like would look under the chairs for like microphones. I was like, oh, no.
So to say that you were the number one skeptic is safe to say.
I think
there's some researchers, like if you read some of the history of like the Society for Cyclical Research, but those are usually ones where the mediums are like submitting to research. I just like went and decided to go start doing it.
So your take now on mediumship, has it changed?
Oh my God, completely. Like I will say Laura Lynn, like my friend Joe Peretta, like Renee Buck, like all the, not all mediums, but the ones, I think mediumship is real. I think the ones who are certified by Windbridge and Forever Family Foundation are genuine. They just are these group of people that are, I automatically go to say defying the laws of the universe, but they're not, because these apparently are the laws of the universe. So they are showing that consciousness is very different than we think. I think they are either genuinely talking to people who've passed away, who are surviving in non-physical form, or there is, which I'm hoping is not the case, but there's some way physics that we haven't even begun to learn, like some level of physics that will explain what they're doing. But I think they're 100% genuine, and most likely I think it's survival.
Can I just add that you have also been a medium? You have done mediuming.
Oh my God.
You have brought things through yourself. So
oh my God.
Reluctantly, it seems.
No, I love it. I just can't. I mean, I'm still like in shock at like the 3 times I did this. It's not something I can do normally, and I have to be around other mediums pretty much to do this. But oh my God, yes. Should I tell the story of the Forever Family Foundation?
I love it so much.
Oh my God, this was so weird. So it's my first Forever Family Foundation conference. They normally host grief retreats, but this one was called the Afterlife and Mediumship Convention. And I'm going to add one other funny part that I didn't know at the time that goes into book 2. I'm touch upon a medium, Joe Peretta, in the first one. And I was like, oh, we're about the same age. We live in New York. I think we could be friends. He was not thinking the same thing, apparently. Now he's one of my best friends, but he was like, who is this, like, journalist or spy? He thought I was a New York Times journalist or sent by one of those skeptical organizations to like eviscerate them all. And he's like, I do not like her. Which when I found out was, oh my God, so funny. So I went to this convention, and it was this is when I first got to meet Fran and Bob, which, is really special to me now. And it was divided into 4 tracks. You either were there for grief, which was the track I went on, or you were there to develop your mediumship abilities, which was levels 1 through 3, depending how advanced you were. And I was already volunteering for Forever Family at this point, but virtually. I hadn't met any of the people yet. I'd been doing their social media. So go to this convention. The last night it was called like Strut Your Stuff Dinner. And there was a panel of like 12 of the mediums, and guests who had been there on the mediumship track could go give them readings and get feedback. So, at this point, I'm so skeptical. So Bob Ginsberg's just making fun of me. He's like, Liz, why don't you get up and give your great medium readings? And I was like, haha, right. Then I thought, well, does everyone know who Lloyd Arbach is? No.
Please tell her, Nancy.
He's a parapsychologist. He is, I believe, director of the Rhine Institute and the Rhine Education Center, which was founded, I think in I forget, 1910s or something by J.B. Rhine, who was a parapsychologist. It was originally through Duke University, and they did tons of research on mediumship, psi abilities, Zener cards. They have a fascinating history, and they've since broken away from Duke, but they still exist as a research organization and a school where you can take online classes. So I'd taken a lot of classes with Lloyd Arbach, who was at this retreat, and one was on developing your psychic abilities, but you also learned about cold reading, not to do it in a sleazy way, but I think anyone studying this should be very aware of how this can be faked.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, okay, you know what? I'm going to get up and give a cold reading. And Fran explained what a cold reading is and was like, people should be aware of that. Make sure you're not getting cheated. So I get up and I'm like, well, the only person I knew at this point of the mediums was Laura, and I'd read her book. So I was like, oh, I'll just give her a few facts from her book. And so I'm saying a few things. And then it was I started to feel so weird. I was kind of feeling dizzy and all these waves moving around me. And I was again, I was just yeah, it's my first time in a crowd full of people since my loss. This must be my brain neurons healing. And then it was I kind of froze. I kept thinking of things from Laura's books, but about losses. And I'm not going to use losses or something serious for entertainment. So I just felt frozen. And then all these waves, and I have no idea why I did this, but I walked over to this other medium, Joe Scheel, who I now know, but I didn't know him at all at this point. And I start saying things the waves start feeling really weird. They were moving all around and through my body. And then they all congealed in my heart and kept going all to my heart and bursting, all to my heart and bursting. And I was did someone die of a heart attack? He's yes. Then they all went to a spot in my brain. Right after I said yes, they I felt them all move, and they went to a spot in my brain, built up and burst. Spot in my brain, built up and burst. And I was I'm feeling this. Did someone die of a brain tumor? And I was no, it's bursting. It's probably an aneurysm. And he's yes. And I'm just what the actual fuck is going on? This is the weirdest thing that has ever happened. It was amazing. And my readings were really different from that point forward, because when mediums would say, well, I'm kind of feeling this sensation, and could it be this? I was a lot more willing to collaborate, not just give away all my information. But before, I'd be oh, they're feeling this? What? No, come on, stop the bullshit. But it was I understood where they were coming from and was able to have a collaborative readings, which really kind of opened up the next level of evidence.
Ooh, that's such a good point. That's really cool the way you said that. That when you're sitting in a reading, obviously you need to make sure it's not cold. And so the definition of cold is you're going to a person would ask leading questions, or they would say, for a cold reading technique is, I have someone with a name that starts with a J, or, whatever. I've got your grandmother here, and they go, yes. And they'll give, and a sitter might be and she da-da-da. And then the medium would just kind of tail on to that. So anyway, just a quick backstory of cold. But the collaboration aspect, I never know how to, I invite that just sort of with our opening prayers, or sort of how I open a reading, but it's really helpful. And I think it's helpful for listeners to understand that difference. If you're sitting there cold, arms crossed, prove it. It's a whole lot harder for us to read for that, because the energy itself is actually blocked.
Yeah. And that's how I was a lot in the beginning. And then after this, that energy, I think, changed. And, it was just a very different approach. And again, I wasn't like, I lost my dad. His name is like, whatever. Can you bring him in? You know, the way I've seen people do that. I was still like, yes, no, like keep expressions off my face. But yeah, it felt different. And then, yeah, if they said I had this sensation, like I was a lot more willing to work with them and be like, yeah, that sounds along the right path. Can you take it like a little further? Or, you know.
Right.
Yeah. And then the depth of the reading can get to a different level.
Yes.
Like more of a richness, more of information coming forth that isn't just
the first
like your
blush.
address or your numbers or dates or something more meaningful too.
Yeah. We've said it before on here. Don't feed the medium, but be nice to him. Or encourage them.
Yes. I think I was missing the be nice in my I wasn't rude, but I was just like, yes, no. I'm like, you know. So.
I love it. I love it. Go ahead.
Your relationship to your own intuition changed since you've been doing this?
It has. I mean, I think for multiple reasons, partially these exercises, partially I think like the people I've brought in my life, like there's just so many ways that you change, like some of this studying and some of it based on a loss where it's really important to me at another level to be around people that feel right and not kind of lie to myself about things. And I think so much of how we're raised, and you know, I'm sure it's cultural, but I feel I was very much raised to turn off a lot of my intuition. I mean, in certain areas, like my parents always talked about, like, go with your heart and listen to things. In certain areas, yes, that was encouraged. In certain areas, that was completely discouraged. So I think it's about a lot of times kind of part of it, like, loss based and a little bit like relearning to listen to that and not do things you don't want to do, as well as a lot to do with studying all of this.
Well, you are such a you're such a student. You're like always going deeper into the next topic. Like it's fascinating to me. One of the things I loved was your description of the OBE research, and you had some experiences too. Would you mind sharing about that?
Sure. You know, so I go into a few possible more in my second book where I might have had out-of-body experiences in my dreams. But basically what I find so interesting, OBEs, you kind of do these, the places I took classes was the IAC, International Academy of Consciousness. They still exist now, but unfortunately are only virtual, but I'm sure you still learn the same things. And it was about like feeling energies, and I'd start to feel the waves like going all through me. And what was interesting was I would feel them move like a few feet above my body and feel sensations up there. And that was so interesting. And then like I learned a lot about, I learned a lot about out-of-body research, such as, you know, people getting things verified, there's this one story, and I'm not sure officially if it's remote viewing or out of body. I believe it's actually was remote viewing, but
That's
I was
great.
told this in an out of body class and in a remote viewing class. I don't know if people are familiar with Russell Targ, but he's a researcher, and he went, they also think a lot of this kind of plays with time, and he went to, I wish I had the exact facts right, but I'll give the general concept. He went to go remote view a certain location in a building, and he came back and drew it and drew like either like a pool recreation center there or water towers.
The water
there,
towers. That's what it was.
Yeah.
It was.
And it was marked wrong. Yeah, it was marked wrong. And then 10 years later, those were built. So
I love that. They're like, this guy's way off base, and then here's some water towers for you.
Yep,
that's wild.
Just amazing.
We've had some of those conversations on here where Sarah did a reading where a spirit showed her a place that she was going to be 6 months later.
Oh yeah,
that was Bruce Lee, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll have to send you that episode.
Yeah, please do. Please do.
But that kind of like time jumping is so fascinating to me. And I'm starting to really like, once you've like heard about it and thought about it, you'll start to see it in your own life. Like I have a friend who's going through a really hard week and her stomach's been really upset for 3 days. And then she found out something super scary about her own dad's health. And I was like, oh, that's just her knowing, or she visited the future and knew it was like, do you know what I mean? That was my perception of it, and who the heck knows? But like, I just am starting to see the wiggliness of time now.
Yeah. Yeah. Agree. I know there's some way it's just so different than we think. And the way like remote viewers get future information, get past information. I mean, there's even studies that we're all perceiving the future. Do you know Dean Radin's studies on that?
No.
Oh, so fascinating. Like, so all of us, I mean, we already kind of know we're seeing things a little bit in the past. Like we're never seeing anything going on right at this moment, like because of the way information travels in light. Does everyone know about that? Or you want me like, so
you can say a little bit about that. I think that's interesting.
Okay. So this part, like normal, quote unquote, normal science already knows. Like, for example, if the sun went out right now, we wouldn't know it for 7 minutes because like the information, like light rays carry the visual information of what we're looking at, and it takes the speed of light to travel to us, and that's based on like how far away something is. So looking at the sun, it takes I think 7 minutes for what's going on right there to travel to our eyes. And that's why, when now we have telescopes looking out into deep space, we're looking like, maybe like a couple million years in the past, or I don't know how long, but like if there was an alien species that was really advanced and they were looking at Earth from a certain distance, they would look at us through their telescope and see dinosaurs. And that would look like that was going on right now. So we're already times like distorted in the way we get our information. Now, what Dr. Dean Radin did was he set up like, I don't know, like machines that read our galvanic skin responses and pupil dilation and had people look at photos with different emotional content. And let's say, I don't know, and there's also one Dr. Daryl Bem, Google Dr. Daryl Bem porn experiment.
And then protect your searches.
Stephen. Yeah, exactly. I like went to look at it. I had to sift through a lot before I found like what you actually would want to listen to about this, which was Stephen Colbert interviewed him, and it was called like Daryl Bem Time Traveling Porn, which is a great clickbait tagline or title. And so in these, let's say like Dean Radin did ones where like you'd be shown different photos that were behind a screen, and one, let's say, was very emotionally neutral. One was like horrible, like violent photos, and one was maybe like beautiful and like loving. And you have different physiological, again, I might have it wrong, it might have just been one type of emotional, but one would cause intense emotional reaction, one was neutral. There are a lot of variations of this, and you have different physiological reactions, the way something's emotional, whether it's emotional or neutral, and your pupil dilations or skin responses. And people would have the responses I believe like it was either like a second or millisecond or something, but they would have their reactions before seeing the imagery.
Whoa.
Like, I don't even know I can't begin to even know what to think of that. That's so crazy. But this is always times just so different than we think. Yeah. Crazy, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely crazy.
That is amazing.
So
I know I just said to Sarah right before we started, Liz, is I was like, this could be a 4-hour conversation, but unfortunately we do keep ours to under an hour. So unfortunately we do need to close. And I just want to thank you. I really genuinely, I think Sarah did earlier, like your research just buoys us up, because I mean, I'll speak for myself as a kind of like, what am I? I'm a medium. It's like, I feel like I've learned so much from you about what it is that I do. And I'm just really, as I know our listeners will be too, grateful for you. And they're excited because they get the whole catalog of your podcast and your beautiful books too. So thank you for being with us.
Yeah, we love you.
We
adore
love you, Liz.
I love you both too. So thank you so
Rubber gloves
much.
and all.
Oh my God. Yes.
I'm glad it wasn't your first medium, though.
Oh my God. I know. I feel I need to apologize to like my first 20 mediums. So.
That's good. It's good. It's just true. Like, it's just true. It's just how we're built. But your journey is very inspiring. So
Yeah.
Thank you again. We'll see you soon.
Definitely.
Okay.
Bye.
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 Thank you. Bye. Medium Curious is made possible
by Jane Morgan Editing.
Sarah Rathke made the amazing music. Mixed by Podcast Engineers.
And you can help Medium Curious by downloading the episodes
and following our socials.
And please subscribe to our newsletter on mediumcurious.com.
And the dogs under the desk in Hawaii are Kalea and Domino.
And Trixie in California.